Hi guys, I thought I would finally give you guys a face to put with the name. So I'm Michelle. I live with my husband in Seattle. I've lived here for about 12 years, but I've only been really doing lapidary work for between 2 to 3 years. So not that long. So I actually come from Texas and never really lived close to any beaches or water of any sort. And so I started out actually just collecting beach rocks and tumbling them in a rotary tumbler, and kind of graduated to a vibratory tumbler after that. But you end up just collecting tons and tons and tons of rocks and not a whole lot to do with them other than maybe wire wrapping. So it's been a journey for me, I'd say, over 4 years. And so the last couple years I've been cutting and polishing rocks to use for jewelry pieces. And I kind of wanted to talk about equipment. So I'm working on a polishing video to kind of show what my process is, but I wanted to talk about the equipment in general. A lot of the equipment when you first start with lapidary is just extremely expensive. I mean, you can, if you're just talking about tumbling, you can go to Harbor Freight and spend, $80 on a dual barrel rotary tumbler. But for the most part, like brand name tumblers are going to cost something in the $200 to $400 range, maybe more, the larger sizes that you get. And I wasn't willing to actually spend that kind of money. So when you start getting to the polishing, cutting and polishing, you can get trim saws for tile cutting, somewhere in the $80 neighborhood. But trim saws for lapidary are way more expensive, and you start getting into the $400 and up range. And when you talk about polishing, if you're talking about making cabochons or even face polishing, you can start out with flat laps, slant laps. There are cabbing machines that actually have different grit polishing wheels. And that starts, in the $500 range all the way up to $3,000 to $4,000 probably for a cabbing machine. So, as I've progressed through polishing rocks and doing different kinds of things as a hobby, I definitely didn't want to spend a lot of money on lapidary equipment. So I ended up going the route of printing, as you see over my right shoulder, a tool. And there's actually a great channel that I'll link where this guy is SweetGum NYC. And he actually came up with a design that gives you a saw, a little tile saw, and then it can convert to a slant cab machine, slant lap, or a flat lap machine. He calls it a gumball machine because it does basically everything, an everything gumball machine. And I actually started out doing that. So I have printers over my other shoulder. And most of these parts you can just print and get away with. If you've got a printer, if you don't have a printer, you can buy a cheap printer on Facebook and get away with printing most of your parts, and then buying just the saw blades themselves, as well as the lapidary grinding discs. So there's some money spent in that, but for the most part, you can get away probably with printing a 3D machine and just getting started for a fraction of what it's going to cost for you to purchase an actual lapidary trim saw, an actual cabbing machine, a flat lap, or anything else. So my journey actually started the El Cheapo route because I just wasn't sure how much I wanted to spend on this hobby. So there is a route to go. If you can obviously start out with lapidary equipment and buying it used on the market. There's a huge used marketplace, whether it's Facebook, Reddit has a lot of different hobby forums that you could, people are always buying, selling, exchanging equipment. But I didn't even know what I was looking for, even going through all the forums. So I knew I wanted to start with something easy. So I ended up going the route of this gumball machine, which actually was a really good start and lasted me for a couple years. until I figured out what I wanted to do. So I'll kind of walk through what that machine looks like versus what the machines look like now that I've got. Okay, so ignore the middle pile of rocks that I'm working on. There is nothing neat about my work process, so I can be somewhat messy down here. But what I'm showing you right here is actually the first setup that I used for cutting and polishing. So this is the Everything Gumball machine from SweetGum NYC. And it's actually a beautiful design. So for a small donation to his YouTube channel, and I think he's got a Discord channel as well, he'll actually send you the print files for 3D printing this. He actually gives you a very detailed list of items that you'll need to buy. So that includes a variable speed motor, as well as a variable speed drive with a CNC motor, as well as different collets for attaching different things to this Everything Gumball machine. And then you're going to have to buy your own blades. I think his initial setup is for a 3-inch, 4-inch blade maybe. And I ended up, modifying his files and using 6-inch blades. So I've got tons of 6-inch blades that I go through. And so this is actually the initial setup for a trim saw. So when you are done with the trim saw, you have the option of changing out the parts so you don't need your water tank anymore, and you'll flip the handle, and then this actually puts it in a vertical position that you would attach a different fitting here, and this becomes your flat lap. And this can actually also be set up just as a slant cabbing machine if you want as well. And he's got so many different ideas of things to do with this. So, I'll end up changing this out. And then with that, I can actually use different types of backing plates and put different grits of grinding plates on there. I can also put wet pads on here. So initially I was using a lot of these wet sandpaper pads to polish, because sometimes these metal grit pads are just so harsh and it scratches up the rocks as you're working. You need something softer. And this one, I could easily put wet sanding pads on here, as well as just good old regular polish pads. So this was my initial setup. I would say, this might cost me, for a trim saw and for a cabbing machine, as well as other machines that'll let you use this for. This is probably all in all maybe $300, which is a fraction of what it would cost, like I said, to buy a real trim saw and a flat lap. So this is my current flat lap, which I'll go through and talk about next. Okay, I just was going to show you guys the polishing equipment that I use on a lot of my face polishing, as well as my cabochons that I like to make. But I use just the, it's a flat lap. This flat lap is made by High Tech Diamond, and it's an 8-inch all you need flat lap for lapidary work. And so basically what the process is you start out with a really rough grit for sizing the material. So you might end up with a really rough rock that you want to take down to a polish. And in order to polish it, you've got to get a lot of the rough material. You've got to work with a fairly flat surface in order to get it really shiny. So you start out with shaping, and typically, the all you need flat lap from High Tech starts out with 180 grit, which is what I would consider kind of a more medium grit. So I've got some smaller discs from another flat lap that I had that I start out with really rough. I'll start out with like a 60 grit and knock off as many of the high spots in the material that I want till I get a pretty much what I consider a flat surface. And then I'll go through and I'll start out with these other discs. So typically this machine, you can order other discs, but I think the standard disc is a 180. And it comes with some other composite discs. So this is the only metal shaping disc that you get. And then these are what are called smoothing discs and polishing discs. So you end up going from 180. I've got a 220 coming. That's a composite. This is a 325 to a 600 to a 1200. And then 1200 it skips to vinyl polish. So different pastes. You end up using 15,000, 30,000. I think I've got up to like 150,000 grit paste to get the final shine on it. Most of these do have a water system so that it preserves the life of the discs, but it also keeps your rocks and gemstones from overheating. So it does have a drip system. This is the basic drip system. I'll probably end up upgrading it sometime to something that's got a pumping system, and drain it to probably a 5-gallon bucket instead of something small like this. But this is what I've been using, and so far it works for me. So that's just a quick discussion on the type of equipment that I use for polish. Okay, so I hope that was helpful, at least to kind of talk about, my path and the different monetary options that you have going the lapidary route. You don't have to automatically or initially spend a lot of money on lapidary equipment. And when I talk about this one costing me about $300, I want to say that the spindle motor that comes with the variable speed drive, the different collets, the little U-clamp that you actually bolt the motor to, the actual pieces that you will print, that is probably $80 if you buy that through AliExpress, probably $100 to $140 if you bought it on Amazon. And then the rest of the stuff is parts. So you can, the beauty of that is a small footprint. So if you don't have a lot of room in your house, your spouse is yelling at you because you're messy like me, you've taken over a whole, basement room with your toys. This allows you to play with something in a very small footprint because you end up just using one tool to do multiple things. Like I said, the motor and the variable speed drive is going to cost you about, let's say, $80 if you order it through AliExpress. You can buy any one of these. So I used initially a lot of these wet discs. You don't have to buy metal discs. You can do almost everything with wet discs and pads. Wet discs will probably cost you $20 for a lot of these. Or you can go with the diamond polishing pad route. These typically are somewhere in the $30 to $40 range for these. I think cutting discs for the saw might cost you $20 for a set of 6. So it's just a very cheap, efficient way. So that's why I said maybe $300 in total. You probably get away with $200 if you were just going the wet sanding route. Cheap, small footprint, but it's not going to be optimal for cutting larger rocks, for polishing larger rocks. If you go the route of, actual lapidary equipment like what I did, so I ended up buying, a diamond, a high-tech diamond saw along with it, which I didn't show you guys. So the 6-inch saw is probably somewhere around $600. And the 8-inch flat lapidary, all you need machine is something like in the, I want to say it's probably same, somewhere around $500, $600. So, you'll end up with tax here in Washington State, it's 10%. I would end up paying somewhere around $1,100 or $1,200 for all that. And that's not even including upgrades. Like if you wanted to have, a vise to guide your rocks, or like I want to, get a water system. A water system is probably like another $50. So, it ends up being a $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 spend. And you can do that initially for $200 to $300 and just wet your palette to see if it's something that, you want to do. So I thought I would talk a little bit about that before I start going into my polish videos. So sorry if it was long-winded, but maybe it helps some of you who are thinking about getting into this as a hobby. So see you around.